Welcome to Focus, Faith, and Fueling, the Winning Edge podcast, where young athletes, parents, and coaches learn how mindset, nutrition, and faith work together to elevate performance, resilience, and overall health.
What you eat and how you think can elevate and transform your game. If you're ready to gain a true mental edge, fuel your body with purpose, and stay grounded in what truly matters, then this podcast is for you.
We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, author, coach, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom to two young athletes.
And I'm Stacy, sports dietitian, author, speaker, and nutritional consultant for over 19 years, and a mom of two teen athletes.
Our goal here on this podcast is really to provide athletes, their families, and coaches with information that will support them in their journey as people and as competitive athletes. So we talk with people who are shaping the future of sports from every angle. Today's guest is Evan Willsmore, Director of Player Personnel for the Vegas Nighthawks in the Indoor Football League, and someone whose story is a true example of grinding from the ground up. Evan's path started with a love for football in middle school in San Diego, and by the time he was just 20 years old, he was already helping evaluate talent and build opportunity in the alternative football space. His journey has included work as a former Hula Bowl scout, coverage of the XFL and CFL as a journalist, and a growing reputation as someone who knows how to spot talent and create connections. He's also already been part of a championship culture, helping the Vegas Nighthawks win the 2025 IFL title. And beyond the resume, what stands out most is the work ethic, balancing school at LSU, long nights of film study, and the kind of relentless drive that has helped him move quickly in the game. Evan recently graduated from Louisiana State University with a Bachelor of Science in Sport Administration. And his story is a great reminder that opportunity often meets preparation when someone is willing to put in the work. Let's get into it. Evan, thank you for joining us.
Lindsay, thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Thank you. So I want to kind of jump in right at the beginning. Like, when and where did this love affair you have for football begin?
Yeah, my love for football really started, like you said in the introduction, probably in middle school. I had a good group of friends that I'm still friends with to this day. We went through high school together and all that, and they were kind of around the game more than I was. They were playing Friday Night Lights, flag football here in San Diego. And so they would always, they'd have their little group going, and we just started watching NFL games together. We started talking more, about football. I was definitely more into the pro side of the game than I was the college side of the game. But that just kind of grew and changed over time. And definitely by the time, that I was in high school, after I've watched the sport for a couple of years, I don't know if I ever made an official decision, but I just kind of knew probably about halfway through high school that that's what I really wanted to be in, for the rest of my life, if I could make it happen. And ever since then, I've pursued that harder and harder. Obviously went and got a degree in sports, and now we're sitting here, obviously getting to work for a pro football team. It's been a blessing ultimately. I'm very fortunate to do what I do. Obviously I've had a lot of success, but that doesn't happen without, a lot of great people in my life. And of course, those friends who first introduced me to the game. But that's how I got my start. Again, it was very, very humble, as you might say.
I respect that a lot. And I think that, there's this perception that people go into the sports world, right, and do what you do because they were the athlete that played through high school and college. And that's not necessarily the path that everyone has to take. I think that, your work ethic is a big contributor to where you are right now at such a young age. And so what shaped your work ethic?
It's a good question. I think, it started with my education. I think education is extremely important. And obviously, especially in maybe high school and college athletics nowadays, that kind of gets lost, with NIL and, guys are going to schools for money before their actual academic career. But, education did really shape me in those early stages of life before I got to college. So specifically, again, middle school and high school, I went to one school for both. It's a school here in San Diego called Pacific Ridge, grades 7 through 12. And so again, that kind of allowed me to, as I mentioned previously, have the same group of friends, grow with them, develop. And obviously this is a private institution, so we had very small class sizes. Everything felt very intimate. The teachers really cared about you. They instilled that confidence in you early on. And that just really laid a strong foundation, to chase my pursuits. Obviously, it's not like I had a background in sports or my family was really into that. I kind of built that myself. And the reason that I had the confidence to do so is, again, because of those teachers and those students that I had around me in my early academic career. And of course, that applied when I got to college. College was a much different environment. I went to a bigger
Mhm.
school, a big public school in LSU. I'm in the SEC, but I used all the skills, I applied them, and that allowed me, to just continue to be more confident and to really chase my dreams. Right.
So, what were your favorite courses in high school? Like, if you could
That's a
go
great
back and pick
question too.
once.
Yeah, so as you kind of mentioned in the intro, I used to do a bit of journalism, and we'll get into more of that later here, I'm sure. Journalism was kind of my entry into football in the sense of actually making it tangible, and I talked about that in my book. I'm sure we'll get to that too eventually. But yeah, I took a journalism class when I was there at Pacific Ridge in high school, and that was one of my favorite classes, so much so that I actually took it 2 years in a row. The next year was a different teacher, and I was able to kind of help him out with some stuff, and I guess you would say further the vision of what the program would become, in the years after I graduated. And then college was interesting. I'm sure, a lot of people who are listening to this out there who went through an undergrad program, whether it's in sports or not. You've got your gen ed classes, you've got your core
Right.
classes, which for me were in sports, and then you've got your elective classes. For me, obviously, the sport classes were the favorite ones. It took me a couple years to get into those. Right, you do the gen eds first, then you
Yeah.
eventually work your way into the more detailed stuff. And I really enjoyed, those core sport classes. But I do think some of the electives I took too. Just this last semester before I graduated, actually, I took another sport journalism class, sport media. I guess it was more of a broad class, but I learned a lot. A lot of that class, it wasn't even, I guess, hands-on teaching. It was more just a lot of what we're doing now, which is, open discussion and kind of reviewing thought processes and just being honest about, a lot of things that are going on in the world currently. And so those are the type of things that I enjoy, kind of that applied learning. I think that yes, people can tell you stuff, but if you're not actually practicing it each and every day, then it might go to waste. So those kind of classes, right, where you kind of have those good relationships being built, with your peers, with your teachers. Those were the ones I always enjoyed on a more broad scale. But of course, anything involving sports and what I've decided to pursue was stuff that I always cared about and stuff that I was always engaged in.
I think it's really important that you bring this up because a lot of times athletes, like you're saying, there's NIL, there's money on the table, there's alternative motivation to go play at the next level. But if athletes and even non athletes that love sports, if they can consider the fact that the education, you can take what you're learning and you can apply it to your love of that sport or to your athletic journey, and you can really create something tailored to what your interests are and propel yourself further in life through that, which you have exactly done. Even having not been on the football field in the jersey, you took that passion for football, applied it to your love of journalism and all things sports, and you've created this life for yourself that many people would say it's very hard to do, especially that you've done it so early on. So I love that you pointed out the role of education and where your love and interest of all this kind of meshed with your passion for football. Thank you for saying that.
Of course, no, definitely.
So I want to know because your current role is amazing. How did you get into this connection with the Nighthawks?
Yeah, this is a fun story. I love telling this story. I tell it all the time to people because they ask the question. It's a very popular question. So as we alluded to, I was doing journalism. Once I got into college, even though I wasn't a journalism major, I was really hammering out journalism stuff purely to make connections. And that was just kind of my foot in the door. I loved writing about football, talking about it. It was easy, right? And again, I could meet people through that. It was kind of a way to prove that I was actually serious about the game, that I knew something.
Yeah.
And again, it just got me into a lot of places, right? So I was covering the XFL at the time, which is now the United Football League. It's kind of, changed and evolved over the past couple years. It's kind of an alternate, to the NFL, which is obviously, the primary professional football league here in the United States. And yeah, I was covering that. I was going out to Houston, Texas for a couple games here or there, just to write articles. There was a team that was playing out there, and I would cover them and kind of, talk about their coaches, players, how the season was going, whatever. And when I would go to the games, I would sit up in the press box. And when I was in the press box, there was a guy, his name was John Murphy. And he was the former assistant general manager for the Toronto Argonauts in the Canadian Football League. And he was there kind of scouting a lot of guys just seeing what was going on. There were actually a few guys from that team that we watched that went on to play with him in the CFL because, like I said, he was working for Toronto, right? So
Yeah.
I got to kind of know him, and we had talked over, social media before, which is of course a great connector, and that's how I've met a lot of people, is through the online platforms. But we kind of got to talking in person, made it feel a bit more tangible, built a relationship, and towards the end of my time there, I just kind of told him, I said, hey man, if you know anybody in the personnel world, because that's what he was doing, we would talk about players and acquisition and how to evaluate talent and all that. I said, hey, if you know anybody, I'd love to, try and start a career in this. I mean, I know I'm early or maybe it's early to pursue that. Like I'm young and whatever, but I was ready to take chances on myself at that time. And, a couple months after that, this was in 2023, like summer of 2023, we'll say. A couple months after that, I was looking around at the indoor football league because the XFL and the IFL had a partnership at the time. It
Mhm.
was kind of a bit of everything. It was a bit of player personnel, it was a bit of marketing, but they had a partnership, right? I was aware of this league. I had actually been to a game before because there was a team in San Diego, which is still around. And I met this guy again through social media. His name was Mike Davis. And just by coincidence, this guy, Mike Davis, had worked with John Murphy in the Canadian Football League at one time with another team, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And I started talking to Mike about, what I wanted to do, what my future looked like, you know, and he ended up calling up John, and John kind of put in the good word. And within a couple weeks, I was hired. I was 19 years old. I kind of just threw myself into the ring, for lack of
Yeah.
a better term. And, it was really exciting. Again, I didn't really know entirely what I was doing, but I knew that Mike would be a good mentor and a guide. And he kind of slowly ramped me up into what I'm doing now to where it's more free flowing. And again, I'm more independent. I don't have as much guidance. Obviously, I'm always seeking help from people and especially
Yes.
him again, because of how well he's treated me. But that was really how things got going. It was again, utilizing these connections, which in sports is so critical. I don't think I have to be the one to say that. I'm sure that's been preached many times by many different people in this space. But it was
Mhm.
really just, maximizing those connections and seeing like, okay, where can I go? What makes sense? And ultimately it worked out really well for me. The relationships that I've fostered and developed, from that since I've started this job, it's just continued to grow, right? The network has only gotten bigger, and now I have access to, people that I thought I might never be able to talk to, general managers in several leagues and all sorts of other coaches and players. I mean, it's amazing to me, how connected things really are. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've learned throughout my own journey, not to get off topic here, but, that
Oh,
is
no,
one.
I
Just
agree.
yeah, it's just, I genuinely think about that every day. I was just having a conversation with one of my friends about this last night. It's staggering. Like you meet somebody and they know somebody, and you've probably already ran into that other person. And in my case, that was how I ended up getting a job. And so I think
Yeah.
that can be echoed, across a lot of different spaces. But again, especially in sports for people who are wondering, how this all works and how it might be done.
Yeah, and you said a couple things I wanna just come back to, the power of having mentors and also taking risks. We say a lot to our athletes, like, "Don't be afraid to fail," right? Do what scares you. That's where your success lives, is on the opposite side of your fear. But networking, putting yourself out there, that's where a lot of the power is. So I love that you brought that up, and, I wanna know, like, what about this opportunity, like, really caught your attention?
Yeah, well, it starts with the people. I think more so than the actual opportunity, right? When I got on this call with Mike in 2023, probably July or August of that year was when I was introduced to him and we kind of connected for the first time. Just right off the bat, I could tell that, me and him had the same thought process, right? And as I got to know him more and more, there were these little things that we figured out about each other that just made a lot of sense. And you could kind of then understand why the philosophy was so similar in the first place. But when we initially talked, it was less about the place and what might happen. And, instead it was more like, this is somebody that I just really want to work with and grow with and develop with. And again, within 2 years, that led us to a championship. And so I think that speaks volumes when you're looking for an opportunity. It's not just necessarily, okay, what can you pay me? What's going to come of this? It's more, who am I actually going to be working with day in or day out? Because that'll
Mhm.
set you up for the maximum level of success. And so I'm not sure if I necessarily realized that immediately when I started
Mhm.
working with him, but it became, clear very quickly within those first couple weeks that we started to again hammer things out and put things together and talk more about the players that we wanted to bring in. It was just like, wow, a lot of things are clicking, and I don't even really have to. I don't want to say I didn't have to do anything, but it was just kind of like he would say something that I was thinking, And that's always
Yeah.
a good sign, especially in sports where it's like, all right, I can trust you in a
Hmm.
team environment and situation. I don't want to say a lot that can go wrong either, right? But there's so many variables when you have so many different people in one building and they want to do so many different things. But as long as you kind of have that foundation where everybody's on the same page, everybody's being open, everybody's being honest, I think that makes the opportunity so much more valuable and intriguing. And again, as the months went on in that role, it just kind of continued to get better. I mean, sure, there were some, times where it was like, am I doing things the right way? Is this really going to become what I want? But,
Hmm.
with every instance of that, good, bad, and different, I was just able to learn so much. And even here, 3 years later, almost since I took that job, I still feel like I'm learning again, despite all the success that we've had there with our franchise. You're never not learning. If you stop learning, I think you've kind of lost the vision and the purpose. So again, I'm very grateful to have what I have. And yeah, that's ultimately, I think, what made the opportunity intriguing was just the ability to learn and have what I was talking about earlier, that kind of hands-on application of stuff that I had already been learning for a number of years because I
Yeah.
told myself I could do it, right? That's the first step is just belief, right? I told myself, yes, I can do this. I can go get players. I can scout. I can evaluate. I can communicate. But if you're not actively doing that, then like I said before, some stuff can just fall by the wayside, go to waste. And then you kind of just sit around wondering, oh, what if I'd done this? You kind of contemplate, right? And as much as I
Yeah.
love to contemplate about certain things, I also like to take action, and that action was one of the best I could have ever taken. So
Well, and I agree with, when you have a shared vision and mission and you're both looking or your team and your organization is all invested in that. And then there's continued growth that you're able to see. It's really a perfect combination. And I think that's something that all athletes need to be looking for too when they're looking at, even something like, what college do I want to go to? Well, is that vision and mission aligned with your beliefs and what you want to bring to the table? And is there going to be continued growth? Are you going to be pushed to have that growth throughout the process? Because that keeps you engaged, it keeps you committed. And I think that you're experiencing that in your professional role as well. So I love that response. Thank you. I want to come back to something that it blows my mind because you were not just an LSU student going through your program. You were doing this job at the same time. And so I want you to just kind of share how you balanced being a student uh, and getting your degree while taking on this role.
yeah, obviously, this is a question that comes up in conversations that I have with people a lot too. And it's another one that I enjoy talking about because I do think that there is a lot to learn from this specifically. Again, obviously, a lot of the previous experience that I've talked about, that's going to vary from person to person, depending
Mhm.
on what they want to do in sports or another career potentially. But in terms of just, balancing education and professional pursuits, I think that it's just, I had always kind of been somebody who liked to schedule, kind of have a plan. I was always like planning my weeks out in advance and looking at
Hmm.
times and saying, okay, this is what I want to do. This is when I want to do it. And once I was doing that already. And so before this job opportunity even came into play, I was making schedules and once you kind of realize, like, okay, I have this much time left in the day that I haven't scheduled. Well, why not, potentially schedule that, right? If I'm feeling up
Hmm.
for it. And, again, college just gave me a lot of flexibility because, some of the classes were online or hybrid. And so, yes, I did have a few in-person courses that I had to take, but ultimately I would try and stack those together where I could just kind of knock all of them out in the morning. The thing is, if you take, and this is a hypothetical, right? But just to give people
Yeah.
somewhat of a tangible example, if I have class from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., I get back, I have lunch, I do a bit of homework, bit of studying, whatever. Maybe that takes an hour or two. I mean, by 3 p.m., the rest of your day is open, and because I live by myself, I didn't have many extracurriculars going on. I could kind of spend the rest of my day doing that, right? Working on my databases, watching film, whatever it be, getting on the phone with agents, players. There was always a lot of flexibility for that. It just starts with discipline, in my opinion. You can have a lot of time. Time is such a valuable asset. I don't think that can be wasted either. But if you
No.
don't know how to use it, that can hurt you. And so, because I was always kind of wired, again, naturally from a young age to build these schedules, kind of build a curriculum for myself, you know, I realized once I got to college, like, well, now, you know, the schedule isn't as busy as it used to be. Like, yes, I still have things to take care of, but as long as I get those done first and I make them a priority, it's not going to take me nearly as much time as it used to. Because, again, for example, when I was in high school, you were on a campus from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. every day. In
Oh,
college, that wasn't the
absolutely.
case at all. I was living in an apartment. I would walk to my classes. I would come back, and then it's like, now what? And so for me, again, it might vary from person to person, depending on what else you have going on. Maybe your schedule is busier, but for me, I already had a lot of time because I would move most of the stuff to the front of my day or, the middle of my day, whatever it was. But I would always have time around that. That was just kind of like free time. And again, sometimes it's important, I think, too, to just not have anything scheduled, whether that be to take time for yourself, but also to consider some of those variables that might come into play. You might think that you're not going to do anything that day, and then you get a call and it's, hey, we need this. And that's sports sometimes, right? You just have to get
Right.
on it in a moment's notice. But those were all things that helped me kind of, again, balance the professional opportunities against my academic career when I was actively pursuing it, which of course is no longer the case as I graduated a couple weeks ago. But I never was once, I will say, last thing I'll say on this, I was never once stressed or felt like that I couldn't do it. And I think that if you are having those feelings, it's important to evaluate what you're doing in your schedule. Again, am I allowing enough time for myself to relax and just kind of be me? Am I allowing enough time to actually get the work done, or am I just rushing through it? And it might take some kind of picking and tooling at it, for a bit. But ultimately, if you do it the right way and you're kind of just honest about it, I really do think that, you can free up a lot more time than you'd expect. And that means that, you will only be able to do jobs like that or pursue opportunities better. So,
I agree completely. Being in education, one of the things that I've always stressed to students is your time management. I love that I had the experience of being a college athlete because in the classroom, I could say, well, what did you go home and do last night that you didn't have your homework, today? And they would say, oh, I had baseball practice till 7 o'clock. I'm like, well, what'd you do in the time between when you got home and when you had to leave for practice? What did you do when you got home from practice? How much of that was video
exactly.
games? Where was TV? And I would say, like, the most important thing you can learn now is how to manage your time, right? Be a kid, be a college student, live all those experiences, but also understand that like your time is so valuable. And so thank you for pointing out, that your time's the most valuable asset. I feel like I wish I had this the recording to play for my students, all through the years teaching, but maybe some of them will hear it now too that are, younger and need to understand that. How do you think that, this season of life from being a college student and having a career has stretched you?
No, it stretched me tremendously. I mean, my life has opened up in ways with the opportunity that I have now that were once a pipe dream, right? They were almost unimaginable. It was like, well, that would be great, but this and that. Now I feel like, again, I have so much more freedom in my career. I feel like I have a strong network. I have people that back me. I have people that I can always go to. I mean, again, the relationships that have come from this have just been incredible. Again, I always had good friends, right, in high school. I always had my family, but the business relationships are different because
Yes.
sometimes only people in the business will understand what you actually go through. I'll give an example of this. I've got a good friend. His name is Anthony Tanza. He's the director of player personnel for the Jacksonville Sharks in our league, and he's only a year older than me. He's doing his master's right now, finishing up at Florida Atlantic. And so we met at an event. It was called the Tropical Bowl down in Orlando, Florida. And this is kind of an event, where college players come, agents are there. It's a big networking thing. Ultimately, you're there to scout. There's probably a
Yeah.
hundred players or whatever, but really, it goes beyond that, right? You're sitting in these rooms, you're at this hotel, you're coming together, you're meeting new people, and those are the events I love. I think in sports, stuff like that is so critical. Again, whether it be these kind of, I don't know if you call them invite only scouting
Right.
events or showcases, but just conferences in general, right? Where you might have speakers. There's the personnel what's it called? The personnel showcase in Nashville is in August every year. That's something that's big in my industry personally. But going back to the example with my friend Anthony, I met him and just so quickly realized like we had so much in common within a day or two. Kid that I'd never talked to, I'd never met, I'd never known about. We were hitting it off, getting drinks at the bar, whatever it is. And, now I talk to him every day, right? And we text
Yeah.
about stuff that's going on in the league. And again, it's all this kind of internal stuff that people wouldn't understand. But when you have that connection on that kind of level, it runs deep. I think there's no other way to put it. It's just,
Yeah.
you feel so comfortable, you feel so connected, you feel so engaged. And it's kind of assurance that you've maybe done things the right way. When you're
Mhm.
talking to somebody about that, it's like, okay, well, I'm not the only one who understands this or thinks this. In
No,
so
you need
many,
that validation too
of
to know
course,
that
validation is
willingness.
important. In life, I think that there's times where maybe you feel alone. And I think even in sports, everybody preaches this team environment. But I do think that, players, coaches, whoever still can get singled out and kind of feel like they're left on an island. But I
Oh,
never wanted to be that
100%.
way. I
Right.
never wanted to fall into that trap. And so it was important to me to like find people who kind of knew what was going on. And again, in the past couple of years, because I've had this opportunity and been able to go to these places, again, the world has opened up for me more in that sense. And I just feel, again, I'm very fortunate. I've said that 1,000 times already,
Yeah.
but it's good to just have that kind of stability and that just that feeling of, again, you're never alone, right? And
Yeah.
that's applicable not just to in sports but in life. And I think that gets lost a lot because everybody talks about a team camaraderie, and everybody's on the same page. Well, guess what? Sometimes people aren't on the same page, and sometimes people
Right.
don't have the skills, again, whether they're coaches, players, other staff. They don't have the skills to communicate that. And so it's always been important in my role, despite me being more of a front office person, again, to foster those connections, maintain those connections. The players I work with, whether they're playing with us or not, those are players that I want to stay connected with, through the rest of time. I want to see, where they go in life and what they do. And I think, again, when we talk about just the success of the job, which I know isn't really related to the question, but just going back to that for a minute, you know, it all ties back to those relationships. And I think that if you're not willing to put in the time, to understand people and to see people, it may be hard for you to be successful in this industry. And that's just I don't want to be brutally honest or whatever, but I think that has to be discussed. And that's something I want to tell, anybody out there, young, old, indifferent. It's incredibly important in this industry nowadays, and it will only become more important.
I really like your response because it answers that question perfectly to me. It stretched you to become such a resilient person who can find the connections and make the relationships to get you through and to get others through. But then it also answers a question that I was going to ask you about, like, what makes this work meaningful to you personally. And I can tell it's the relationships. It's the relationships, it's supporting your athletes, it's bringing in the talent and developing them and pushing them. And so it's very clear to me in that response that I already know the answer to what makes this work meaningful to you. I mean, I can
Yep.
tell it's the
Yep.
relationships.
That's exactly what it is, Lindsay. And, I think, again, as time continues to go on, I develop in the role. I just see that more and more. It only
Mhm.
becomes, the network only becomes wider. You have players that become friends. You have,
Yeah.
friends with players. You've got players that become friends with coaches. Everything just becomes interlinked, and again, that's the purpose of sports, right? Like, especially on the youth side of it. And again, obviously what we're doing is minor league pro sports. So yes, guys are making money. Yes, the stakes are increased, but these guys are trying to go do other things and apply the skills that they learn here to other elements of their life, because a lot of these guys are working other jobs. Some of them are trainers.
Absolutely.
They're trying to develop the next generation, and so yeah, I mean, it's just it's great to see. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to be a part of all those journeys, and I hope that more continues to come from it.
Well, I'm sure it will. And it actually, I want to reframe something that I was going to ask you now, because knowing your joy in creating these authentic relationships with everybody that you come in contact with, I think speaks volumes to who you are. But it can't all be this authentically easy, right? We know that there's roadblocks and that there's struggles and setbacks. And so I just want to ask, like, has there been any major or significant roadblock or setback for you that you've had to overcome where those relationships have played an important role?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. More so, I would say, I don't know if this applies as much to sports. It does now, right? And it's still a thing. But
Mhm.
obviously, when I was growing up, again, this was around that middle school, high school time. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and that was a big moment in my life. Again, you talk about these kind of eye-opening, life-changing moments or experiences. That was the one that I always go back to. And yeah, I mean, I remember that was a pretty tough time. There was a lot to figure out, and fortunately, most of that has been figured out now. There's still things that you're kind of, tooling around
Mhm.
with. It's not something that goes away, but I always relied on the people, to get me through those times. And the people would kind of take me away from, those difficult situations. Or maybe I was having a bad day, you're getting stressed, whatever, you're trying to figure this out. No one really has an answer. And your body's reacting in a different way. Again, all these variables. The people were always what took me away from that and kind of just acted as, that blanket of comfort. And I think I bring that up because again, that was at a time where I wasn't fully in sports yet necessarily. I was still kind of trying things out. But I think that diagnosis, in a way, was what pushed me to chase my dreams in sports more because it showed me,
Yeah.
hey, like life is short, things can happen. You don't know what might be taken from you. And obviously, that's very difficult when you're young. Nobody wants to hear things like that. Nobody wants to deal with things like that when you're young. People always say, oh, you're too young for that. But it's not like I really had a choice. It's either
Right,
you
right.
handle this or you let it control you. And I was, of course, going to handle it and figure out what I needed to do and still chase all the things that I wanted to chase because I was young. I still felt like I had a lot to prove. And, I'm sitting here now, what's it been, almost 7 years since that diagnosis. I still feel the same way. And so if that didn't happen, of course, everything in life happens for a reason. I think that that was a blessing in disguise, despite some of the challenges that it threw on me, because had that not happened, I'm not sure that I would have been so driven again to go find these things in sports and to kind of put myself out there and be like, all right, I understand this is a competitive field, but I'm going to see what I can do. I trust myself. I know that I can develop these relationships, and I've seen from other people, again, these mentors, these role models, how meaningful that can be. And yeah, I would say so far it's paid off for me. And again, a lot of those same friends that I had, that I relied on during that time all those years ago. Like I said at the top of the show, we're still friends to this day and they still rely on me, for all sorts of advice and reasoning. And, I don't want to say that that I'm a mentor myself, but I have kind of taken on that role quietly, because people do understand what I've been through. They do understand how successful I've become since then. And they kind of want to know, again, kind of like what we're talking about now. How does that happen? Right. And so I'm fortunate to be in a position like that at all, but it's not like it was easy. Right. And you hear that from
No.
people. But
And
I
I
think,
think a lot of people expect things to be easy, right? Or we want
yes,
things to
yes.
be, especially given the culture of society right now where it's immediate gratification.
Mhm.
I did this, I want this as a result. Like, let's go. But life isn't an Amazon delivery. And I do think that in order to become a resilient person who can overcome setbacks, you have to be grateful for everything that you're given as an opportunity. And as much as, you had to go through a really difficult situation and that doesn't go away, like you said, you have learned to be grateful for every opportunity you have, which gives you a different mindset in how you approach life. So you are a mentor to so many, but I think it's okay to understand that you can be a mentor and still have mentors. You can be a mentor and still not have it all figured out. The whole point is that you're always
Absolutely.
learning, you're always growing. And so your wisdom is continuing to develop in the process. So I have a lot of respect for you, going through what you've went through, not letting that become an excuse to not chase your dreams or not letting that become a reason to give up on certain things. I think it's propelled you. And so, I wanted to go into a segment about leadership and growth, but I think you are a leader given that, you've overcome some major obstacles in life and you've done things that are hard. What you're doing right now is not an easy task. Your role with the Nighthawks is not an easy role, but you have taken that as like, well, I don't know how to do it all, but I'm going to learn. I'm going to find the mentors that can teach me and I'm gonna build my wheelhouse of what I know.
Exactly. And I think the last thing I'll say on this before we get into the next topic here, a lot of people ask me, like, would you go back and change anything in your life up to this point? Obviously, I'm still young, still got a lot more life to live. But
Right.
that is a question that comes up sometimes. So, like, would you go back and change anything? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I mean, yes, there were some hard times. Yes, there's been some good times. Yes, there are things that maybe I don't regret, but maybe I wish I handled differently. But you learn through each one of those experiences. And like I said earlier, if you're not learning, then that's, especially at this point in your life, if you're not learning, that's not a good thing. Ultimately, that's the easiest way to put it. I
Yeah.
think that you have to be honest about, again, your progress. And like you said, you don't have to have it all figured out, and that's okay. I think that a lot more people who look like they have it figured out actually don't have it figured out. They just kind of portray that, or people see them that way because of the successes, because of the glitz and glamour. And sports emphasizes that more than anything. I mean, especially again in college athletics, you see these guys now that are getting paid, sometimes seven figures with NIL. But these are still 18 or 19-year-old kids, and I know when I was 18 or 19, like, yes, I was on the way to figuring it out, but I still had a lot of questions. I still had a lot of things that I didn't know. And just because somebody hands you a check doesn't mean that's going to solve all your problems. As a matter of fact, at that age,
Huh.
I think that it could cause more
Gonna
problems
create more.
almost. But I definitely think that that's worth discussing. Just because yeah, I mean, it's becoming in sports, it's only becoming that situation is only becoming more and more common. I think again, where and not to, I mean, obviously, mental health is important too, right? You see some of these guys who they go through stuff that they get out of sports. You wonder what happened to all sorts of things, right? And I think that you know the answer sometimes to that question that people don't want to admit is yeah, like these guys, they had a lot of money. Sometimes it's not even about the money. Sometimes it's just about
Mhm.
image, right? It's, did I do well enough? And I think all those things kind of come into play. And there's just more pressure now with that financial element kind of hanging over everyone's heads because sports has grown so much, especially football. I mean, it's amazing, even in the past 5 years since COVID,
Yeah.
just what football has become in this country. I think that that does need to be verbally recognized just because it's not going away, and if we don't address it, I feel like it's almost a disservice, right? So to all those kind of players out there that are dealing with that status, dealing with more fame, I think it still is important to have the right coaches and the right people around you. And that goes back to your point that you were talking about, like when you're, again, if you're a younger athlete, right? Maybe not somebody that's a
Mm.
pro, but even if you are pro already, somebody that's a younger athlete in elementary school, middle school, high school, you shouldn't necessarily be thinking about right away, okay, how much is this program going to pay me? You should really be thinking about, okay, can I go here? Can I grow? Can I get on the field? Can I actually make a name for myself and build a legacy? Because that will propel you so much farther than just what you might get up front. That will build a life for you that is successful and fruitful for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But we've become so short sighted, again, because
Yeah.
of the way that things have grown and that instant gratification. You talked about it too. Everybody wants it now. But sometimes it's not about what you have now, even if that feels good. It's about what things could be. And it's hard for some of those guys when there's so much going on, but I feel like it is important to recognize at minimum. And, I would be again doing a disservice if I didn't bring that up. So
Yeah. I in my time with kids, it never ceases to amaze me. The goal setting process is it's pushed to the wayside, right? Because the goal is I'm going to go play in college, or the goal
mhm,
is I'm going to have this job, and not the goal is I'm going to do these 5 things for the next month to build a routine to prepare me. I'm going to do these things as my 6 month goal. There's not short term goals being set. Everything is so big, but there's no path to get there. And the path is not always going to be a straight line. It's going to look like a spaghetti bowl. So I think that with athletes, I want to ask you, because of your role that you have, what advice would you give to athletes who are wanting to take their game to the next level, like the level that y'all's guys are at? What
mhm.
would your advice be to them?
Just be really honest with what you want, right? Because I've come across a lot of players, in my time, and this isn't a slight on anybody. Let me be very clear, but I've come across a lot of players who they think they want something, and then they see the reality of it, and then they go, "Oh, I'm not so sure," because at the minor league level, for specifically what we do, and I can speak to that, better than anything else. Like again, that financial component might not be as lucrative, and so we have some guys, right? Especially now, again, with the development of NIL through the past couple of years, we have recruited a couple guys, who have seen some money in college, and then they get to the minor league level, and they're like, wow, this is really, it might be humbling in some ways because yes, while it's still competitive, while we're still chasing a lot of good things, the money isn't what it used to be. The status isn't what it used to be. You're not on ESPN every day, and I think that that is a good experience for some guys because, you know, ultimately sports is a learning experience for life more than anything else. And I think the minor league stuff that we do in the indoor football league, I think that's a good way of of opening guys up to that. Like guys will come do this and they kind of realize like, well, hey, yes, I'm still using this as a platform to potentially go play in the CFL or the UFL or one of these leagues where, I might be more stable again and I can really make this a career. But if not, I can use what I'm learning here as a pro athlete because at the end of the day, you still now have that pro athlete label, which you might have not had before if you hadn't already been
Right.
in the NFL or one of these other leagues, which for our guys, it's a mix, but you can kind of use the skills that we're teaching you and apply that to the next phase of your career. Because I've always said with the IFL, this is kind of, there's a show on Netflix that I watched, Last Chance U, and I've actually worked with a couple of the guys that were off that show. And that was one of the shows that I watched when I was first getting into football. Last Chance U, it's essentially following, all these JUCO athletes, these football players and their
Yeah.
careers. And
Yeah.
it's these guys, it's a very similar thing, right? Some of these guys were at like a big program. You go down a level and it's like, wow, I really have a lot of self-learning to do, I guess is a good way to put it. And I learned a lot from watching that show because, there were a lot of guys who realized through that, like, hey, this is bigger than football. This is more about how I'm going to take care of myself and my family and a career that I might have got a degree in. Like a lot of guys who come to us, I don't want to say, of course, I don't want to say that they're lost. I think that a lot of these guys have a great foundation. If you're able to pursue a minor league pro football career and still have some other gig on the side, where you can be successful, I think you've pulled off the ultimate balancing act. And I would give any player credit, who's doing that, which again, a lot of our guys have done that. And a lot of the guys that are on other teams. But, it's just, I always tell guys, like, yes, we want you to set the bar higher. We want you to go here. And that helps, the image of our league and our team.
Right.
But if you're not able to if this is kind of it for you in football, right? Because, most of these guys are on 1-year deals. We're bringing them in and out. It's kind of a showcase thing. Above all, like if this ends up being it for you, like that's okay. Because as long as you learn something within our program and you're able to apply that somewhere else and that leads you to success, then I think we've
And
done
you
our job.
win.
It amazes me even now. We have power four athletes. Of course, we've got guys from all levels of college football that we've recruited to our team, but it does amaze me the amount of guys from that power four level who, despite the money that they've seen, are still, chasing this, pursuing it, kind of helping other people. Because to be honest, they're the ones who might not need to do it. They've put the money in the account. They can just go on with their lives, but they're here for a bigger purpose. They still love the game. They're still trying to learn. They understand that they're young and they've got a lot of life ahead of them and that they need more skills to apply to future situations. And those are the guys that I have the most respect for because there's a lot of people who think that you wouldn't be able to get any of these guys because they'd just be caught up on the money side of it and they've already been here and that this would be too much of an ask for them. But again, my job is to kind of, weed those guys out and see, okay, who's really about it, who's really serious. And I think that when you are bringing in guys of those caliber, they've also had the best experience. And some of them have, again, been evaluated by those higher level teams in the NFL and the CFL. And so you kind of get this perfect mix of these guys have the will to do it. They have enough talent to where you can be successful and continue to push your program forward. And they just set a standard, right?
So I know our time is wrapping up, but I do want to ask you to, real quick, just talk about your book, Married to the Game, and share some of your future goals.
Yeah, so I published a book a couple months ago. It's on Amazon. It's called Married to the Game. Have a copy right here. Just so everybody can see that. But yeah, I wrote this book over the course of about 6 months. Documenting a lot of my life story, kind of a lot of what we talked about here today, right? Just again, helping people out, how things are done. Obviously my take on how to handle certain situations. I don't want to say that I offered a ton of advice, but my hope in writing that book was, of course, people would read it and they'd see, okay, this is tangible, right? Like if he can do it, I can do it, type of thing. And so I do want it to be kind of a form of mentorship, but of course there's
Mhm.
just some personal things in there and it's an autobiography of sorts. I'm not sure if it'll be the only book I write. Again, people joked with me, maybe in 20 years you'll have to write another one. And I said, well, at the rate we're going, I probably will have to,
Yeah.
even if I said that that might have been the only one. But anywho, no, I wrote this book and it was a bit spontaneous. My grandpa wrote a book and I think that's why I was motivated to do it. Again, if he could do it, I could do it. And I enjoy reading his book. Again, I learned a lot in that book that I didn't know about him and also what I didn't know about life. And so trying to combine those was really the goal here. And the feedback I've gotten so far is that I did a good job on that. So of course it's on Amazon. If you want to go and buy it, $15, or if you have Kindle Unlimited, I think it's free for $7 for the actual Kindle copy. There's all sorts of variations nowadays, right?
Yeah.
I had to try and, set that up the best I could, but I know the book's out there. Obviously it would mean a lot to me if you went and read it or purchased it, whatever you want to do with it. And yeah, that's that's kind of how that came around. Again, it was, like I said, pretty spontaneous. I kind of but there was a 6-month block where I pretty much just worked on that every day. But I'm glad we got it out. It was definitely a big personal achievement for me, something I can be really proud of. It's still crazy sitting here when I look at this, seeing me on the cover. And my
Yeah.
buddy, actually, one of my buddies from middle school designed the cover. And so that meant even more to me too, obviously. But yeah, put that together, kind of figured out a lot in that process and just how publishing works and how formatting works. And again, really, it was all kind of a self-learning experience. Some of the stuff that we've talked about already, like I was watching YouTube videos, and again, I didn't really have any
Right.
guidance or instruction, but it goes back to that bigger point of, sometimes you might not have all the answers, and you might not know how to do something, but there will always be somebody out there, who is willing to help, and you just kind of have to go find it. You have to
Yeah.
chase things down, hunt them down, whatever you may call it, but that's kind of the beauty of it. It'll just be more stuff that you can talk about later that's a part of your process. And I think that that's important in the grand scheme of things as well. So
I completely understand that. My business partner and I, we published a book at The Winning Edge, and it was a very eye opening experience on all of that. And then when we published our athlete's prayer journal, again, that was, everything from the sizing of the cover and all the templates and
right.
everything that you have to go through. So I understand. I'm very proud of you for going through that process and putting it out there. And I can't wait to read the
Thank you.
book.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And what are your goals? Like, if what are your goals, or where do you see yourself in the next 10 years?
Next 10 years, obviously it's tough. I tell people the sports world changes so much. In 10 years, I might be working a job that doesn't exist right now.
Yeah.
But I think that, as long as I'm continuing to grow, right, I'm continuing to be in sports. Some of my mentors in football have told me that as long as you're doing something, sometimes it might not be exactly what you want, but because this is such a competitive industry and there's so many different
Mhm.
outlets, as long as you're doing something to keep your name within multiple circles, you're always going to have opportunities. You're always going to have places you can go. And I think the goal for me is to just, keep getting better, not only within football, but within, my personality, within my beliefs. I think that, that is ultimately what's guided me, to pursue a lot of this stuff. But obviously, as I get older, there'll be more responsibility, there'll be more challenges. But I think I am sitting here today and I feel better about tackling those than I ever have. I feel like I have more skills, more resources. Again, the backing that we talked about, which is so
Mhm.
critical for any of this to happen. I feel like sports has again guided me to that, and it'll continue to guide me, but now there's just going to be more different components. And I think within the next 10 years, that growth and change will continue to be seen more often. And I'm excited for it. I'm excited. I embrace the journey again, good, bad, and different. Sometimes things come up
Mhm.
that you don't expect. I mean, I think that when I first got into football, I never envisioned that it would be arena football or indoor football. I never even knew what that was when I was watching like NFL games for the first time, right? It was all new to me.
Right.
But again, as you sit there, you learn more about it, you connect the dots, you get in touch with people. The world just continues to open up more and more. And I think that that's my expectation of where I will go in the next 10 years is it's not necessarily one job or one place, but it's more, everything around me will just continue to expand. And I think that that's really important. I'm not sure if that's the answer I would have given 2, 3, 4 years ago when I was at the start of everything and I was still chasing things. And I still am, right? I still am chasing things. Let's not get that confused. But I think that, now I have a bit more of a diversified outlook, we'll call it.
Right.
And,
Right.
I can see, I can take sports and I can apply that to so many different things in my life. And I think that, again, had I not chased what I chased and had I not had, some of the success that we had there in Vegas, I don't know if I would have been able to do any of that. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think that, as I sit here now, there's a lot of uncertainty to a degree still, and I'll be open about that. But I think that the future is bright, and that with what I've done, I do feel confident that I've set myself up for success some way or somehow. So
Yeah, I think that my advice as a older, much older person is to continue to be open to opportunity, like you have been. Just continue to see every opportunity as a possible chance for growth, and to have that self reflection at the end of every day, and being focused on becoming a better version of yourself every day, and you can't go wrong. So we're looking forward here at Span Athletics to watching your journey as you continue. And I appreciate you so much for taking time to do this podcast with us.
absolutely. No, again, thank you, Lindsay. It's an honor to come on. Glad, we got through a ton of different topics. And hopefully, if you're out there listening to this, you're able to take something away from it and learn something. Because, like I said, learning, especially through sports, is one of the most important things in my personal opinion. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more real world tips and conversations with coaches, athletic directors, current and former collegiate and professional athletes, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and other performance experts.
If this episode gave you something to chew on, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe. Nutrition is important, but let's be honest, we've all got to eat. So help us feed this podcast so we can keep fueling you.
Don't forget to join the Span Athletics community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at @span_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.